Think about the last time you were driving on a totally familiar highway. Like maybe you were just commuting home from work.
Right, totally zoned out.
Exactly. You're just completely zoned out, thinking about, I don't know, what to make for dinner. And suddenly you pull into your driveway with absolutely no memory of the last 5 miles.
It's honestly a terrifying feeling.
It really is. Your brain basically just went on standby and your body took over on pure autopilot. I mean, you navigated traffic, you made the turns, but you weren't actually present for the journey at all.
Yeah, you're just a passenger in your own car.
Exactly. Now, what if I told you that is exactly how a staggering number of us are living our entire adult lives?
It's a profoundly unsettling realization, honestly, because, we operate under this persistent illusion of intentionality.
We like to think we're in charge.
Right. We like to believe we are the ones holding the map and, charting the course. But the reality of human behavior, especially as we age into all our responsibilities, is that we stop charting a course and simply start following the traffic.
We just stay in the lane because, well, it's the lane we're already in.
Precisely.
And then comes that jarring moment where you look out the metaphorical window and realize you have absolutely no idea how you ended up in this particular career or this city, living this specific routine.
You just wake up one day and think, how did I get here?
Yeah. And that feeling, that sudden awareness of being a passenger in your own life, that is our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the eternal tug of war between following your dreams and surrendering to being practical.
It's such a universal struggle.
It really is. And our source material for this is actually a fantastic conversation from an English learning show hosted by Jake and Anna.
Which I know might sound like a bit of an unconventional source at first glance.
Right, an English learning show.
Yeah, but what makes their discussion so compelling is that they aren't just teaching vocabulary. I mean, they're using language as a diagnostic tool.
Oh, absolutely.
They look at the specific words we use to justify our life choices, and in doing so, they provide this brilliant lens into the psychology of why we settle.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start by looking at the quiet nature of our actual aspirations. Because when we hear the word dream, society has completely conditioned us to picture a cinematic montage.
Oh, 100%, the big Hollywood moment.
Right. We imagine holding an Oscar or ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange or, moving to a cabin in the woods to write the next great American novel. We are basically trained to think of dreams as these loud, disruptive, status-driven fantasies.
We culturally equate dreaming with achieving massive scale. Like, if your dream isn't going to disrupt an industry or make you millions of dollars, society subtly suggests it might not be a real dream.
Like it's just a hobby.
Exactly. But the source material completely dismantles that stereotype. Jake and Anna point out that for the vast majority of adults, real aspirations are actually incredibly quiet.
Yeah, they aren't chasing the spotlight at all. Usually it just boils down to an intense desire for autonomy.
People just want a sense of freedom over their schedule.
Right. They want work that feels intellectually or emotionally honest to who they are. Or frankly, they just want to wake up on a Tuesday morning without feeling a physical weight sitting on their chest.
Which is huge.
It is. It's about a life that feels authentic rather than a life that just looks impressive on a holiday card.
But the tragedy of the human condition is how easily that quiet authenticity gets compromised. We rarely lose our dreams in one dramatic, theatrical moment of surrender.
No one's calling a press conference to give up.
Right. Nobody officially waves a white flag and declares, "Today I abandon my passions."
Because if it were a sudden, dramatic event, we would fight back, right?
Yeah.
We would recognize the threat.
Exactly. Instead, it's just a slow, imperceptible fade. Life simply gets expensive. The fatigue of daily existence sets in.
You get a mortgage, you have bills.
Yeah, you have a partner, maybe children, aging parents, all these people who rely on your stability. And in the face of all those very real, very heavy responsibilities, the concept of safety transforms from a boring compromise into the most attractive thing in the world.
It becomes incredibly seductive. And the source offers a visual analogy for this that is just, it's incredibly striking.
The window and the boxes.
Yes. They describe your original dream or your aspiration as being like a window in a room. When you're young, that window is clear, the light pours in, and you have this completely unobstructed view of what's outside.
You can see all the possibilities.
Exactly. But as the years pass, life hands you boxes. Like a mortgage is a box.
A demanding boss is a box.
Societal expectations,
Yeah.
student loans, those are all boxes. And day by day, year by year, you just stack these boxes in the room.
And because you're so focused on managing the boxes, keeping them organized, making sure they don't topple over,
You eventually stack them right in front of the window.
you completely block the light.
Yeah. And taking that a step further, I'd actually update that analogy for how we live today. Because to me, it's like having a heavy background app running on your phone.
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
Right. Because you don't see it on your main home screen. You aren't actively clicking on it or engaging with it. But it is slowly, persistently draining your emotional battery.
Because it's still there.
Exactly. It's quietly trying to update in the background, just pulling on your internal CPU all day long.
That captures the psychological toll perfectly. The energy drain happens precisely because the desire hasn't been destroyed. It has merely been suppressed.
And suppressing things takes work.
An enormous amount of work.
Yeah.
The human brain requires a massive amount of caloric and emotional energy to keep a core desire suppressed. It takes a lot of effort to ignore yourself.
Which totally explains why that background app eventually forces a notification. And as the source points out, it always happens at the most disrespectful, inconvenient times.
Oh, it never happens when you're prepared for it.
Never. You aren't sitting on a mountaintop meditating when the realization hits. You're like unloading groceries.
Yeah.
You're standing in a supermarket parking lot holding a plastic bag of cereal, or you're lying awake at 2:14 a.m. and suddenly that old part of you taps you on the shoulder and says, "Excuse me, what are we doing here?"
What's fascinating here is that those jarring supermarket parking lot moments reveal a profound truth about human resilience.
How so?
Well, when you feel that sudden, overwhelming pang of longing or even sadness, it is not evidence that you are empty or broken. It is evidence that you are simply disconnected from a part of yourself that you once knew intimately.
The blueprint is still there.
Yes, the blueprint is fully intact. You've just been reading someone else's mail for the last decade.
So if the blueprint is still intact and the dream never actually packs its bags and leaves, we have to examine the mechanism of avoidance. Like, why do we keep stacking the boxes?
Why do we ignore the drain on our battery?
Exactly. And this is where Jake and Anna introduce a very specific piece of vocabulary to describe this exact state. And that word is apprehension.
And they define apprehension beautifully. Because it is not stark terror, right? It isn't a phobia.
No, it's much quieter than that.
Apprehension is that low-grade hum of anxiety about the future. It's a quiet, persistent worry that sits right in the back of your throat.
It's the friction that stops you from sending the email or starting the project or having the really difficult conversation.
And that apprehension is the driving force behind our absolute obsession with playing it safe. We construct this predictable route entirely to manage that low-grade anxiety.
We just want to keep things under control.
Exactly. But here's the observation from the source that I think completely reframes the issue. Fear rarely shows up looking like a monster.
Because if it did, we'd run away.
Right. If fear looked like a monster, we would recognize it immediately. Instead, fear wears a very respectable, tailored outfit.
It disguises itself.
It completely disguises itself as being practical. This is the ultimate evolutionary trick the brain plays on us.
Because the brain just wants us to survive.
Exactly. The brain's primary job is survival and caloric conservation. It prefers a known misery to an unknown joy because, well, the known misery hasn't killed you yet. So your brain recruits your intellect to protect your comfort zone. Fear doesn't tell you, hey, don't do this, it's scary. Fear comes equipped with color-coded spreadsheets.
Oh, it loves a spreadsheet.
It has a perfectly synchronized calendar. It hands you 12 highly organized, incredibly logical reasons why Q3 of next year is a much better time to make a life change.
And it sounds so incredibly mature. I mean, when you tell your friends you're delaying your goals to build up a larger emergency fund, nobody stages an intervention.
They applaud you.
They do. People rarely stand up at a dinner party and say, I am completely paralyzed by the thought of changing my life. Instead, they say, oh, I'm just being realistic right now.
And because that justification aligns so perfectly with societal expectations of adulthood, the fear goes entirely unquestioned.
Yeah.
We basically reward each other for giving up quietly.
Okay, but I have to step in and push back here on behalf of everyone listening right now.
Fair enough.
Because the landlord also has very practical opinions. You know, bills are not a psychological illusion. They are very real. Rent is real. The pediatrician's copay is real.
Absolutely.
You cannot walk into a grocery store and pay for a carton of eggs with a profound sense of inner authenticity.
Unfortunately not.
So how does someone, let's say a listener with 3 kids and a mortgage, actually differentiate between a gut feeling of fear and a literal math problem? How do you separate necessary practicality from fear masquerading as wisdom?
That is the defining question of adulthood. And you're right, dismissing financial reality as just fear is incredibly privileged and honestly dangerous advice.
Right, we can't just ignore the math.
No, the difference isn't found in the spreadsheet itself. The difference is found in the underlying motivation. When you make a truly wise, practical choice, even a very difficult one, like staying in a grueling job for another year just to pay off debt, there's a sense of internal grounding.
Like a solid foundation.
Yes, you are choosing a hard path for a strategic reason. Wisdom feels steady.
It has a solid floor under it.
Precisely. Fear, on the other hand, feels tight. It feels restrictive and defensive. When fear is driving the practicality, you aren't just delaying gratification. You are actively making your life smaller to avoid exposure.
You are shrinking your footprint.
It's the difference between building a strategic foundation and building a very comfortable cage.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the chronic danger is that when you play it safe too often, playing it safe metastasizes into your actual personality. You literally lose the ability to accurately assess risk.
Everything starts to look terrifying.
Exactly. You start to view any deviation from the routine as an existential threat to your survival. But the profound irony is that by desperately avoiding the short-term discomfort of taking a risk, you are actively manufacturing a lifetime of long-term discomfort.
And the source material uses a brilliant metaphor for this. They compare it to wearing a pair of shoes that technically fit your feet but never actually feel comfortable. You aren't building a life you love. You are just engineering a life that makes you feel less exposed. You look incredibly put together on the outside, but with every step you take, you are wincing on the inside.
And a human being can only sustain that chronic internal wincing for so long before they reach a breaking point, which introduces a totally different yet equally dangerous problem.
What happens when they snap?
Well, when someone finally wakes up to the fact that fear has been dictating their choices for a decade, the immediate overwhelming temptation is to violently rebel against it.
The pendulum swings as hard as possible in the other direction.
Exactly. They want to flip the table. They want to march into their boss's office, deliver a cinematic monologue, quit on the spot, and burn the bridge to the ground just to feel the warmth of the fire.
Which probably feels amazing for about 24 hours.
Right, until reality actually sets in and the rent is due. And this is where the source introduces another critical concept, which is restraint. In our hyper-reactive culture, restraint gets a bad reputation. It sounds boring. But restraint is the vital capacity to control your impulses, especially when your emotions are screaming for immediate relief.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the hosts make a very deliberate point to clarify that recognizing your fear does not mean you are supposed to initiate a messy, dramatic resignation tomorrow morning.
Because not every bold move is actually brave.
Right.
Often, what looks like immense courage to outside observers is actually just severe nervous system burnout. It is a desperate, reactive desire to escape the sensation of being trapped.
It's just running away.
Exactly. Running frantically away from a life you hate is fundamentally not the same thing as intentionally building a life you want.
So by exercising restraint, you aren't actually giving up or backing down. You're essentially building a protective moat around your dream.
That's a great way to put it.
Because when you're starving, a moldy piece of bread looks like a 5-star meal. And when you're trapped, any sudden change looks like salvation. But restraint allows you to say, I absolutely want change, but I refuse to do it from a panicked, reactive mindset.
It is the ultimate form of self-respect. Exercising restraint means giving yourself permission to move methodically.
Taking your time.
Yeah. You are allowed to spend 8 months aggressively saving money. You're allowed to test a new career path quietly on the weekends without telling anyone.
Fist in the waters.
If you jump recklessly without a parachute and you hit the ground hard, your brain will learn the wrong lesson. You will blame the dream and tell yourself you were foolish to try, when the real culprit was simply a lack of strategic planning. Restraint preserves the integrity of your aspiration.
But let me challenge that for a second, because there is a very dark side to planning.
No, absolutely.
Once someone embraces restraint, once they decide to save the money and map out the transition, how do they ensure they don't just stay in the planning phase forever?
That is the trap.
I mean, I know incredibly smart people who have been preparing to launch a business or change careers for a decade. They have these gorgeous color-coded Notion boards and absolutely zero actual momentum.
Ah, yes, the trap of preparation mode. This is where the disguise of practicality becomes its absolute most insidious. There is a razor-thin line between moving carefully and waiting too long.
Yeah.
You can spend years consuming podcasts, reading books, attending seminars, optimizing your vision board.
And it feels like work.
It does. It triggers a dopamine release in the brain that makes you feel like you are doing the work.
But you're really just organizing your hesitation.
Exactly. At a certain point, perpetual preparation stops being responsible data gathering and quietly metastasizes into a highly sophisticated form of hiding.
Which brings us to the threshold. How do you actually cross over from hiding to doing?
You have to make a move.
And the source introduces two final concepts here: conviction and the decision to take the plunge. They define conviction as a strong inner belief that something deeply matters, even if you do not have all the variables figured out.
And this is the psychological hurdle where most people stumble. People operate under this false assumption that to possess conviction, you must first eradicate fear.
They want to feel totally fearless.
Right. They tell themselves, once I feel completely confident, once I'm no longer afraid of failing, then I will take the plunge. But that is a fundamental misunderstanding of human neurobiology.
It's just not how we're wired.
Not at all. If you wait for the fear of the unknown to completely dissipate, you'll be waiting in the driveway until the end of your life.
Yeah, because fear is stubborn. It is an evolutionary hitchhiker. It's always going to be in the vehicle with you.
Yes. Conviction does not mean fear has been eliminated. It simply means fear has been demoted.
I love that.
Fear is allowed to stay in the car.
Yeah.
It just loses its driving privileges. It can sit in the back seat. It can complain about the route you're taking. It can point out the potholes. It can suggest turning around and going back to the comfortable cage. But it is no longer holding the steering wheel.
You take the plunge. You actually cross that threshold. Not because the external conditions are 100% perfect, but because the internal pain of staying the same has finally outweighed the fear of the unknown.
You realize that the cost of inaction is suddenly higher than the cost of a mistake.
Exactly. And finding that level of conviction requires confronting something the source calls inherited lives. For me, honestly, this was the absolute linchpin of the entire discussion.
That's a powerful concept.
Because we understand that we inherit genetics, right?
Yeah.
Or antique furniture or real estate. But we rarely consider that we inherit entire blueprints for how an adult life is supposed to look.
We absorb definitions of success, respectability, and stability from our parents, our educational systems, and our localized culture.
It's just baked into us.
We absorb them so early and so thoroughly that they feel like objective laws of physics rather than subjective social constructs. From an evolutionary standpoint, conforming to the tribe's blueprint meant survival. Deviating meant exile.
So we naturally just follow in someone else's footsteps without ever pausing to interrogate if that path actually aligns with our own internal wiring.
We spend decades pouring our most productive years into being incredibly successful at a life we never actually chose.
You do everything the blueprint requires. You get the degree, you get the title, you get the mortgage, and you look around at this mathematically perfect life and wonder why you feel like a ghost haunting your own house.
This raises an important question, one that requires an uncomfortable level of brutal honesty.
Okay, what is it?
If you have spent the last 10 years holding back your curiosity, suppressing your natural energy, and ignoring your joy simply to maintain an inherited path, whose life have you actually been living?
Wow, that is a staggering thought. If you never audited the inheritance, you might just be the executor of your parents' unfulfilled desires or society's default setting, rather than the architect of your own experience.
And acknowledging that uncomfortable truth isn't meant to induce guilt, right? It is the necessary catalyst. Recognizing that you are driving on autopilot is the exact moment you regain the ability to take the wheel.
Yeah. And as we bring this deep dive in for a landing, we want to make sure the practical application of all this is crystal clear. The goal of unpacking this psychology isn't to force an instant overnight metamorphosis.
No, not at all.
If you have real-world, heavy responsibilities, you do not have to abandon them to find yourself. This is not a binary choice where you either have to be a wildly irresponsible, starving dreamer or a miserably practical, robotic adult.
The ultimate goal, as beautifully articulated by Jake and Anna, is simply loyalty to the dream.
Loyalty. It's such a steadfast, grounding word. It implies a long-term relationship rather than a fleeting impulse.
It changes the entire paradigm. Because being loyal to the dream requires acknowledging that the dream itself might have evolved. What you desperately wanted at 22 might not be what your nervous system requires at 40.
That is so true.
Maybe the dream used to be aggressively climbing a corporate ladder or building a massive enterprise. And maybe now, the truest, most authentic dream is simply achieving deep peace.
Just having some quiet time.
Yeah. Maybe it's finding the conviction to log off at 5:00 p.m. without guilt, or carving out a quiet creative space in your garage on a Sunday morning. The dream might look significantly smaller on the outside, but it is infinitely deeper on the inside.
So it's not about burning it all down.
Not at all. The real task isn't destroying the life you've built. It's negotiating a healthier, more honest collaboration between your inner aspirations and your external practicality.
They don't have to be at war. They can coexist if you stop letting fear mediate the relationship.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? It means you have agency. Even in the dense fog of your daily routine, you possess the ability to recognize when fear has dressed itself up in a respectable outfit.
You can see through the disguise.
You have the capacity to exercise strategic restraint, to protect your long-term goals from your short-term frustrations. And most importantly, you can cultivate the conviction to put fear in the back seat and finally take the plunge on your own behalf.
It means you stop passively accepting the life you ended up in, and you begin the deliberate, quiet work of steering toward a life you actually choose.
So as you go back to your day, perhaps getting back into your car, returning to your desk, we want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over.
Something to really think about.
If your authentic dream doesn't require you to blow up your entire life today, what is one tiny, easily achievable, quiet act of loyalty you can show to that neglected part of yourself before you go to sleep tonight?